So I decided to re-record this video because I felt like when I initially did it, it didn't come out as well as was originally intending. Like I went on a whole entire spiel talking about Rize's chest. So let's not do that. Let's make this a little bit more organized this time around. So for the people wondering why exactly I'm not reviewing the Tokyo Ghoul anime, it's not up to my expectations, even though my expectations are really low. And I don't really want to go into a whole entire spiel explaining why I don't really like the Tokyo Ghoul anime. I can make a separate video on that. So if you guys are wondering, I might drop that later on in the week due to the fact that this is like the last week I have before break. So I might do that later on in the week or next week. But either way, I have to tackle the Ghoul Re versus Kaneki video first. But aside from that, let's talk about Rize Kamishiro. Now, Rize as a whole, I feel like, is a character that is really weird within the Tokyo Ghoul story. Because like a lot of different characters in Tokyo Ghoul, she's kind of tossed in this really weird limbo state where we don't really learn a whole lot about her until after she's gone from the story for a long period of time. And the only other characters that I feel like are in a very similar state to this are someone like Arata, both of Akira's parents, as well as someone like even Tatsu's older brother. I mean, like, there's a whole lot of characters in TG that are in this really weird state of limbo that we don't really get a whole lot about them, and most of the stuff that we learn about them are either from statements from other people in the story, or from light novels, or even side chapters that we get about them, or we just don't know anything about them in general. Like Tatsu's older brother, we barely know anything about him. I don't even think we've seen what he looks like aside from like the ending of Tokyo Ghoul Re, like the ending like segment, not the actual like ending. I like the ending song type part. So yeah, aside from that, let's talk about Rize, because one thing about Rize that I find very interesting, aside from what I said previously, is that we don't really know the real Rize that well, because most of the time we see Rize in the entirety of the Tokyo Ghoul Re manga is actually Kaneki's interpretation of Rize, or just statements from other people. And I would even go to say that because of the way how Rize has been presented throughout Tokyo Ghoul and Tokyo Ghoul Re, she's possibly one of the most, if not the most tragic character in the entirety of the story, due to the fact of her overall sub-theme, which, if you guys don't really know what I mean about sub-theme, almost every single character in Tokyo Ghoul has a very interesting theme that Sui Ishida kind of puts onto them. Like in the case of Toka, a really big sub-theme about her is the fact that she's becoming increasingly more human throughout the course of the story in terms of personality and the way she acts, as well as the fact that she her beauty aspect as well is also played upon quite a bit. And Kaneki in part 1, it's more on the lines of him becoming increasingly more like a ghoul. Hide, a lot of times it's his selflessness. And then with Rize, it's actually her overall aspect of freedom, and the fact that no matter what exactly happens throughout the entirety of her life, even though she does seek and want freedom more than anything else, she constantly gets it taken away from her. And this is the thing that I feel like kind of causes Rize to spiral down this path where I feel like she is kind of a depressing character as a whole. Because I'm not trying to sit here and justify the things that Rize did in the very beginning of the Tokyo Ghoul Re manga, because there's a lot of things that she did that I do feel like is a bit out of line and just overall bad in general, but I would never wish upon anybody in the Tokyo Ghoul story. Okay, I probably would wish some things upon certain people in the Tokyo Ghoul story, but like what happened to Rize is just really unfortunate, where you're literally at the wrong place at the wrong time, very similar to Kaneki. And this is mainly caused by Furuta, and I can probably make a separate video just talking about the connection between Kaneki, Furuta, and Rize, and how they all correlate with one another, because their connection actually does run very deep, deeper than I feel like people give it credit for. But either way, one thing that does baffle me about the Tokyo Ghoul Re manga, at least back around the time where it was coming to its end, was during... Oh wait, actually, before I jump into this, one thing I do want to say, if you didn't see the disclaimer at the very beginning of the video, this will contain spoilers for later events of the Tokyo Ghoul Re manga, so if you don't want to be spoiled, here's your warning, because the anime hasn't really gone into everything that I'm about to say yet. So, yeah. Now, okay, let's hop into this now. So one thing that does baffle me when it comes to the very ending of the Tokyo Ghoul Re manga is the fight between Kaneki and Rize at the very end, or more on the lines of Kaneki versus Dragon / the Oviduct, because a lot of people were really surprised at the fact that Kaneki was crying when he finally encountered Rize's body in the very center of the Oviduct. And a lot of people were like, oh, why is Kaneki crying? Why does he feel bad in a situation like this? He should just finish her off and not think anything of it. But I would disagree. I do feel like Kaneki crying in this situation does make a lot of sense, especially if you look at what exactly Rize meant to him throughout the entirety of the story. Because if you kind of look at it, Rize is the representation of Kaneki's ghoul side. We know this has been established for a pretty big time, and you can even say, in a lot of ways, Rize also kind of represents Kaneki's murderous intent. So him killing Rize is not only literally killing her, especially after all the things that he's learned about her up until this point, which I'll get into that a little bit more in a bit. It's also him killing a part of himself, which is probably the main reason that's caused Kaneki to end up crying in that entire situation, but still willing to do it because he knows it is for the best. Because this is kind of Kaneki putting Rize, like kind of putting down Rize and just causing her to no longer feel the pain that she's going to have to suffer through if she continues on living. And I feel like it's a really powerful scene and definitely one of my favorite chapters in the entirety of the Tokyo Ghoul manga, whether it's Re or Part 1. And I feel like a lot of people just don't like the chapter too much due to the fact of Tokyo Ghoul Re being very fast-paced at the very end of its run. But either way, let's hop into the other aspect of why Kaneki was crying in that scene, and that is the fact that Kaneki is kind of representing the reader at that point in time. Because, like I said before, Rize doesn't really show up too much in the entirety of the manga. Most of the times that we actually get to see her is via flashbacks or statements from other characters, or it's Kaneki's interpretation of Rize within his own mind. So if you have where Kaneki learns all these different things about Rize, the fact that she was literally brought up very similar to a breeding cow, where her own father was the only reason why he had her end up being created, is due to the fact of him being able to force himself upon her at some point in time by the time she's of age, which would be like when she hits puberty, so less than 13, and be able to procreate and just produce very powerful offspring due to the fact of Rize having very indifferent and very powerful ghoul cells. And I'll probably make a separate video just talking about Rize's overall physiology and how, in comparison to other ghouls, she's just very, very odd and very different, because I don't really want to talk about that here. This is supposed to be more of a psychological as well as a more analytical type video talking about her character. But aside from that, you have where throughout the entirety of the story, Rize has kind of wished for freedom, and every single time she's gotten a chance to have freedom, I feel like it's been taken away from her. You have where it starts at the very beginning where she wasn't born with freedom. You can even say that she was kind of born with shackles around her feet, and by Furuta assisting her, she was finally able to escape from the Sunlit Garden. Sachi obviously ended up helping her and taking care of her for a long period of time. We don't really know exactly when, but we know that Rize at some point in time ended up leaving Sachi's care. You can assume it's probably around the time when Sachi ended up getting taken into Cochlea, or Cochlea, whatever it's pronounced. But I'm gonna assume that Rize, because I think at the very beginning of the story, Rize wasn't actually that old. I think she was about like 18 or 19. She was around the same age as Kaneki. But either way, you have where Rize, even though she was living a very free, full life and didn't really seem to care about everything around her, you even see this during the Rize side chapter during Volume 5 of its Part 1 manga. You have where Rize isn't really listening to like the word leaders and stuff. Like we see her actually kill them in that chapter. But she doesn't really seem to care about anything. You even see where this is stated by Banjo. She just comes across as very powerful and very dominant, which is one thing about Rize's character that I feel like caused a lot of people to be very either infatuated about her, besides the fact that Rize kind of had this really weird duality to her, where even though she was sort of faking, I do feel like in a weird way, both sides of Rize are her true personality, where she comes across as very timid and very lighthearted and very kind, as well as the fact of her coming across as very angry and scary and freeful and just not seeming to care about anything regarding the world, or even what the way how the world kind of puts this very bad stigma upon her, calling her the binge eater and stuff like that, as well as her, you know, binge eating tendencies, which aren't really that great. And you can clearly tell that Rize isn't really like a super pure hearted character. She's definitely not. There are bad things about her. I mean, when she's about to devour Kaneki, she's literally playing with him when she could have just finished him off very quickly. But instead, she is playing with her food and toying with him and just causing him to suffer quite a bit. And in a lot of ways, they kind of paint Rize in this monstrous type way, even though in a lot of ways she really is far from. And to be completely honest, I do feel like it's very unfortunate that Furuta really did drop the steel beams on her, because he felt like she was being ungrateful and didn't really seem to care and even be thankful for Furuta allowing her to be let out from the Sunlit Garden. And in a lot of ways, I feel like due to the way how Rize was acting, that was actually her proving the fact that she's grateful, because she's doing what she wanted to do all along, and that is just to be free and not have the shackles of the world wrapped around her. But in reality, she ended up getting the shackles wrapped around her more than anybody else could. And I feel like the way how Rize kind of puts it in the Tokyo Ghoul Re manga during her conversation with Kaneki at the very end, you have where Rize kind of talks about how she was sort of a slave and she was trapped inside of little coffins within several different people. And obviously this is her addressing the Ogai, but I also do feel like this is also her kind of talking about the artificial half-ghouls that have been made from her, both the failed ones and also the perfected ones, like in the case of Kaneki or Furuta. And I feel like it's just really sad to see, no matter how many times Rize was allowed to get some type of freedom and even wanted a chance to just live her own life the way how she wanted to, she never really was allowed to. Because you have where she gets her freedom taken away by the person who granted it to her to begin with, Furuta. You have where she is saved from Dr. Kano and she's put shackles upon by Yomo, and is kind of, she's fed, but not enough where she can break free. She's obviously given to Sachi later on, seemingly is taken in by Arima, to, you know, V. And then you have where Furuta has, you know, Rize for a long period of time, ends up making the Ogai, and then eventually is transformed into the Aviduct that ends up becoming the dragon that ends up fighting, the mini dragon that ends up fighting Kaneki at the very end of the manga. And I feel like the process of that in her entire life up until that point, where she's just been constantly thrown around and used by the people around her, and the fact that no one seemingly was able to understand Rize from a really deep, like, psychological standpoint, aside from possibly Kaneki, is just sad. And you even have where Kaneki doesn't even hold any resentment towards her despite everything that she's done. And you have where Rize, in Kaneki's mind, actually tells him the opposite, where she talks about how much she hated him. And even after all of that, Kaneki still feels bad for her. And, like, I feel like this is kind of transforming more into a video talking about the connection between Kaneki and Rize, and how there is some type of bond there, regardless of it potentially even being one-sided, where only one of them seems to like the other. Not from a romantic standpoint, obviously, but just like out of a respect standpoint, and acknowledging them. It's still just really tragic, to be honest. And, like, I mean, obviously there's a lot of tragic, that was really repetitive, but there's a lot of tragic lives in Tokyo Ghoul. Like, I mean, Toka's life to an extent is tragic. Kaneki's life is pretty tragic. Suzuya's, Mutsuki's, Rize's. I mean, there's just so many people with tragic lives in Tokyo, whether it's from their upbringing or what their life ended up becoming. I feel like Takizawa's might be one of the worst as well, just due to the way how he ended up at the very end. But still, it's just unfortunate what happened to her. And I just kind of wanted to make this video talking about Rize for a little bit. So, if you guys like this video, please hit the like button. It really does help. It gets my video out there. And just remember to comment, rate, subscribe as always. And comment down below your thoughts on Rize. What do you guys think about her? And stuff. And Yeah, I think Rize's hot. That's kind of all I have to say when it comes to that. She's nice in the boob department. So yeah. Anyway, thanks for watching. In the comment script as always, guys. Love you all. Jin Hawk signing out, guys. And comment down below what other videos you guys want me to do in the future. I haven't really decided yet. I just want to get that versus battle out as soon as possible. So see you guys.